Welcome on in, everybody. Hello. We are just getting started with our second lecture of the season 4. And we are going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, although I've never put all this information together for the first time. We are going to be talking about traveling mummies in the early America. So we're talking mainly 19th century. And we're very excited. I definitely finished this a couple days ago instead of today, so be happy about that. We will still answer questions, absolutely. If you don't want your question to be lost, if I'm in the zone and not answering questions, on Twitch, please use the channel point lecture questions, and those will get saved. And then I will hopefully be going back and check just to make sure that I don't miss anything. But sit back and let's talk about some traveling mummies. Let's talk about the beginnings of this research, because some of you guys have been here long enough that you probably know why I started researching this, and some of you probably don't. So one of my very pivotal research topics of my career as an Egyptologist, which is not very much of a career, but is a career nonetheless, is talking about mummies in America and how ancient Egyptian mummies had traveled to America and how they were then exhibited in America in the very, very early parts of our history. And this mainly comes out of the internship that I did at my current job at the archaeology museum that I work, where I was able to research an ancient Egyptian mummy that had landed in my city in the back room of a tavern. And while I was at that internship, I ended up compiling all the research on this mummy and all the places that it traveled, and then later turned that into a paper in one of my museum studies classes that I took in grad school. I then later presented it at a symposium in my last year, like literally 2 weeks before COVID. And then I integrated that also into a presentation at my current job talking about oddities in 19th century taverns. And so we will cover the mummy that you see here briefly, but this topic got me really, really interested into kind of Egyptomania in America, and especially these traveling mummies that are essentially sideshow pieces. And this is long before they were seen as educational and scientific tools. One of my mummy was, and I will be referring to it as my mummy. Yes, there are some, but not a lot. Most of the mummies are just drawings, but the first couple slides you will see some human remains, but not a lot. We're getting there. Although my mummy was one of the earliest to arrive in America, it's not the first, so we're going to start in chronological order, which is my favorite way of doing this, is starting with the first mummies. I also have to thank this woman that you see on the right. Her name is S.J. Wolf. She is essentially the researcher who has compiled all of these with that book that is in the center, Mummies in 19th Century America. She also has a couple websites that you can look into some of the mummies. I was able to talk to her a little bit when I did the research initially on my mummy. One of them is mummymania.omeka.net. She also had something called the Egyptian Mummies of Northern America database, but I don't think it works anymore, sadly. But a lot of the information is on that Omeka's page or is in the book itself. And it's a pretty cheap book. I've got it on Amazon pretty cheap. So let's get started, and we're going to start chronological order. Trigger warning for some human remains, but not a lot. Here's the first one. So the first recorded ancient Egyptian mummy to enter America was a mummified arm and hand. It came to America much earlier than any of you guys might actually expect. So this mummified hand and arm was presented to the Library Company of Philadelphia by Benjamin West in 1763, so before the Revolution, which is why I didn't call this lecture Mummies of 19th Century America, because there is some 18th century American mummies as well. Benjamin West is an artist, and he had purchased it in London by Francis Hopkinson. and he presented it in this small wooden box, and it appears to be the left hand of a small woman covered in 2 bandages with a layer of resin between the skin and the first layer of cloth. The thumb and the rest of the fingers are actually separately bandaged, which actually helps you semi get a good time period. Hello, friend at arms. Not as much, Otto. I will say, not a lot of these mummies in America carry any curse theories, and I think that is mainly because most curse theories came out of British media, and they are a little bit later than some of the mummies that we talk about today. I can't remember. I have a whole lecture on curses. I can't remember when the first one is, but I think it's later 1800s, and we are mostly talking about early 1800s. I know, like, before Tut, there's one in the late 1800s, and then there's the one about the Titanic, which Titanic sinks in 1912. So I think most of them are, I think the other one is just slightly older than that. It actually might be 1900 or so. I can't remember. This is still in the collection of the Library Company of Philadelphia. And you can see, I love the little box that it's in. It has this very worn little tag on the top, which probably talks about its origins. Very briefly, just to kind of set the scene, I want you guys to think about what is going on in the United States in the 1760s, and also think, how much information did these people in the 1760s in America, what did they know about Egypt? And we know that, like, Egypt in the in kind of the mid to late 1700s is really only, that is true, the United States did technically not exist in 1760s. The British colonials, how about that? The British colonists, how much did they know about Egypt? We've talked about this a lot with some of the stuff about the Napoleonic campaign, that Egypt is really only accessible to the very rich Europeans prior to 1799, which is, again, the Napoleonic campaign. So, yes, you're also right. No hieroglyphs have been translated. Almost the entirety of our mummies don't have any translatable hieroglyphs, because even by the time they start going to America, hieroglyphs are not translatable enough to be able to translate them. But yes, so we don't have translations. We don't know what any of these things say. And we have these not accurate imagery coming out of Egypt. Like, none of these places exist. Like, this could be, like, all the way down in Sudan, but it's probably not. It's probably not claiming to be down in Sudan. And so you have these, like, drawings that people are creating by other people talking and not getting a clear picture of what's actually going on. And yes, so a lot of this is there's kind of 2 sides to this. Some of that information is going to be based on Herodotus. It's going to be based on Manetho. It's going to be based on other people that are writing in Greek, or like contemporaries essentially to the Greco-Roman period in Egypt. But also, a lot of this information is going to be based on the Bible, which also does not, I'm not even going to say it doesn't necessarily give a accurate portrayal of Egypt. It doesn't give enough information to give an accurate portrayal of Egypt. You're getting snippets from just a few stories in the Bible. We assume with this piece, we don't know if Mr. Hopkinson in this case got this piece of a mummy because he went to Egypt or because he bought it from somebody else who had been. And so it's still very, very early for ancient Egyptian artifacts to be leaving Egypt in the 1760s. That is really, really early. Because a lot of these early museums are not in existence, and a lot of the reasons that the first earliest objects are leaving Egypt is to go in museums, and most of these museums are not in existence yet, or they're slowly emerging. So because Egypt is so cut off from the rest of the Western world, people are really only going to be looking at Westerner depictions or biblical stories in Egypt, which are not going to be accurate to the actual monument. Ooh, very good question. No, we don't. I don't know if anybody has tested it or done any sort of test on it, but you're right. And you will see that this comes up again. Do we actually know if it's from Egypt? Do we actually know if it's a mummy? We don't. We absolutely do not. When we get to full mummies, they do, like, yes, they are definitely probably coming from Egypt, but as you'll notice, the first mummies that arrive in America are pieces of mummies, or are just randomly mentioned in text and don't give a lot of detail, so it's hard to tell. So, we actually have reports of a silversmith named John Gurman, who apparently imported a unknown number of mummies in Philadelphia in 1800. So we're jumping 40 years to the future. But this got barely any coverage in the press. There's apparently no interest from the public when he bought these mummies to the Americas. And so he apparently stored these in Dock Street, below 3rd Street, up until around 1832. These mummies are apparently sitting in this dock, in this like storage or warehouse or something for like 30 freaking years. Oh, good to know, Alex. Good to know. Yeah, that's not very accessible. So apparently these mummies went unnoticed for 32 years. And they were discovered by workers who were repairing the building. And unfortunately, what did the workers do? They destroyed the mummies because they had no idea what they were or what their value could have been. There is one possible survivor of these mummies, and it, according to kind of documents, is that it may have been in the hands of a private family in Southwark, Philadelphia, until at least August of 1848, but then the trail goes cold. And these are all just random snippets of writing that have been preserved. So there could have been other writings that talk about these mummies, but none of it has been preserved. Yeah, a little bit different. A dock in Philadelphia. All of this information mainly comes not only from a manuscript, but from a note that was written into a manuscript. So the Library Company of Philadelphia had a book called Extra Illustrated Autograph Manuscript of Annals of Philadelphia. And somebody wrote in, at some point, we have no idea when, somebody wrote in, there is a section in the book where it talks about the first Egyptian mummy to arrive in America, which we'll talk about in a second. And somebody writes to the side of it, to the side of this engraving, technically the first full ancient Egyptian mummy that we know about. So the actual anecdote says, "This is a mistake," and quote, indicating that Mr. Gurman's mummies were the first mummies to arrive in America, which is my favorite thing. Hi, Mark. Welcome on in. We just got started, so you didn't miss much. And so this guy, somebody went into this book and was like, "This is wrong. The first mummies to arrive in America are this Mr. German's mummies," even though that is the only writing we have claiming that these mummies came to be. There is also a report that in 1816, an infant mummy was presented to the University of Pennsylvania by Reverend Thomas Hall of Leghorn. It was said to be high perfection, though any other details of the mummy are lost. And he also may have given another mummified hand to the University of Pennsylvania. I don't know if these have ever been found in their collection. Unclear. And in 1817, another hand is gifted, but to a different museum. And this is given to Peale's Museum in Philadelphia, or Philadelphia Museum. And I feel like, there is a chance that this hand may have been the one that was also mentioned in 1816, but it could be a different hand. So it might be the one that Thomas Hall gifted, and then it went from University of Pennsylvania to Peale's Museum, but it's not 100% clear. So this mummified hand was presented by a Dr. Shipton. And if anybody has never heard of Peale's Museum, this is founded by the man here on the left, the American painter Charles Wilson Peale. He very famously painted the portrait of Washington at Princeton in 1779, and a lot of other famous pieces, mostly portraits of some of the founding fathers, pretty much. He founds one of the first museums in the United States in 1784 in Philadelphia. It houses a collection of botanical, biological, and archaeological specimens with hundreds of paintings, and you can see a drawing of it. And honestly, this is one of my favorite paintings ever because it's him standing in sort of a portrait-like sense. He's got the curtain behind him, but what he's doing is he's lifting it up to show his museum behind. It's one of my favorite paintings, honestly. I think it's a fascinating way to kind of display what you are good at. Is sort of, yeah, he does. He's a little funky, but I think that just that painting is just like that reveal is really cool. So eventually this museum would close at his death, and it was split up by P.T. Barnum and Moses Kimball, who is also an early explorer into the museum world. We will be talking about P.T. Barnum a little bit too much tonight. Way too much that I don't want to talk about him, but we will be talking about him. But Charles Willson Peale's son, all of his kids are named after famous artists. I should clarify this. His son's name is Rembrandt Peale, which is like my favorite. I can't remember what his other son's name is, but all of his sons are named after famous artists. So his son, Rembrandt Peale, who's also a painter, he opens another Peale Museum in Baltimore, which we'll talk about later. The Peales are, like, you will notice that the opening and closing of these museums is super common in this time period, and they're like, actually, I'm going to move a museum here. I'm going to open another museum here, but no, I'm actually going to close that museum and I'm going to move another museum here. Like, these are all rich dudes who are getting funding from people who are donating to them. Like, these are people with wealth and money to be able to create these museums. What I find very interesting is that the center of trade and interest in these earliest mummies in America is Philadelphia, which is not what I expected, because for those of my non-Americans, Philadelphia is technically on the water, but it is not on the water like other major cities. It is all like the way up like river system. Like, it is all the way up a bay. It is still very inland, even though it's on water. So I don't think of it as, obviously it was a big port city at that time, but I don't think of it as one of the huge major port cities in the United States in this time period. It's obviously very important because it is the capital of the United States in the very, very beginning, before Washington, D.C. is built, and after New York City was the capital. There's sort of the three of those are the kind of early capitals of the United States, but it's just very interesting to me that this is like kind of the main hub of this trade of mummies. So we'll talk about the first full mummy that we have a little bit more evidence of coming to America. I need to be making sure I'm drinking water because I talked so much today over the past 2 days, so my voice is already going to get cracky. So, besides the elusive silversmiths mummies that came in, this is the first well-recorded ancient Egyptian adult mummy that arrives in America. And I say full mummy versus the hands of mummies. This arrives in Boston on the 16th of May in 1818. It was brought by Ward Nicholas Bolson, who you can see here, and he was a merchant from Roxbury, Massachusetts. Unable to verify it. Let me do that. There we go. It is said that he himself saw it taken out of the catacombs at Memphis. Technically Saqqara. Memphis does not have catacombs. But I'll read this out because this is pretty interesting. Egyptian mummy. In one of the late vessels from Europe, there arrived here a genuine Egyptian mummy, perhaps the first ever introduced into the United States. It is in a state of good preservation and was procured in Egypt, by Ward Nicholas Bolson, Esquire, in his travels in that interesting and ancient quarter of the globe. He saw it taken from from one of the catacombs at Memphis, Saqqara. It is calculated that this embalmment could not have been less than 24 centuries ago, as the most ancient writers mention that the great art of embalmment had then been lost in Egypt for many something, because I cut off the section. And although this mummy arrives in America, and we have it in the newspapers, we actually don't know really anything else about the mummy. We don't know if it was male, if it was female, if it was unwrapped or wrapped. And we also don't know if this was ever displayed in public. So while this is not quote unquote a traveling mummy, which this talk is technically on, I feel like I have to establish to what the standard was for when a mummy comes to America, what is happening. And so it doesn't really appear that it travels around the Northeast at all, and we think that it is probably just an oddity in Boylston's home. But we do have some evidence that it may have been examined by a Dr. John Collins Warren, who we'll be talking about later. He mentions that the mummy, when traveling to America, went through England, and that it may have been opened. Unclear again if that's a full unwrapping, if that's a partial unwrapping, if that's just opening up the coffin. But they appear to have, there's some random notes saying, okay, the flesh appears to have decayed off the bones in many places. And unfortunately, because we are of this time period, much of that talk that Warren gives is talking about classifying skulls. Because this is the time period that we're talking about. So they were like, oh, this looks more to be European or Caucasian. We obviously just, I don't know, like, hello, Mr. Audio Propagations. Welcome on in. We are talking about mummies. Very exciting. But yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about phrenology, but that is part of this conversation, unfortunately, at that time. So that is really all we got about that mummy. That is really very, very minimal. Thank you. I think I do have the best mummies. So, we think that this is the skull, but we'll talk about it in a second. So we know that after this point, he gives this mummy to the American Antiquarian Society. And there apparently are other relics of this Egyptian mummy. He gives them to them in 1819. So very shortly after he brings them, he doesn't keep them in his house for very long. And then he apparently also gave the bone and tooth of a mummy in 1820 to the American Antiquarian Society. We have no record of where these artifacts went. But there is the possibility that they could have gone to the Peabody Museum at Harvard or the Smithsonian, which is where much of the natural history collection of the society, of the American Antiquarian Society had, and they transferred in 1830. We don't got any curse theories in America. All the curse theories date back to England. Alex is figuring out the daily game that we couldn't figure out. That's so funny. So we do believe that the skull and a wrapped left leg of the mummy from 1818 was actually given to Boylston's friend, Dr. George Shattuck, who then in turn gave it to the Warren Anatomical Museum in Boston. And yes, this is named after Dr. John Collins Warren. At the time, or at least what we think is this mummy, the skull has absolutely no flesh. There's no indication that it was ever even part of an Egyptian mummy. It doesn't mean it wasn't, because it's a skull. And then it has this variety of markers that you can see on either side, because it was used as an anatomical subject. And you can see that this is sort of how it's defined in the collection of the Warren Anatomical. And again, it says cranium from the Egyptian mummy that belonged to Ward Nicholas Bolson Esquire that was given after his death to the late Dr. S. The ethmoid is broken away as usual, and in the cranial cavity is a large quantity of very pure bituminous substance, parietal foramen 1/4 of an inch in diameter, and there is some appearance of disease upon the surface of the frontal bone. 1859. Thank you, Alex. We'll check it out later if we have some time at the end. I think this lecture is not going to be as long as some of my past ones. I cut out a lot. I was planning on talking about more, and then genuinely couldn't remember what the bullet points was that I started with. I was like, what is that? I don't remember. One of the really cool things that S.J. Wolf in particular was interested in regarding these mummies is how far they traveled in the United States. And she has mainly conducted this research via newspapers and how they are sort of passing through. She has created a lot of these maps that we are going to look at. In particular, this one is not a map of how far the mummy traveled, but how far the news of this mummy traveled. And this is particularly the news of its arrival. And so we've talked about this a couple times just to kind of give us a basis of how newspapers are working in this day and age. They are working by sending physical newspapers to other newspaper organizations and other newspaper printers. And then essentially they are copying direct stories from the newspaper, which allows that story to then spread further. There also are chances where they're going to cite the information. They're going to say, oh, it's coming from the Boston Centennial. Sometimes they're not going to do that. Sometimes they're going to paraphrase. They're not going to give the exact copy of that article. And sometimes they're going to fully exaggerate and just make up shit. And by tracking this and by looking at all the stuff that they have, you can sort of be able to figure out, okay, where is this information initially coming from? So what you can see is that the first, this might be a little small for you guys, but the first account of it comes in May 16th, 1818. And we have 4 newspapers recording it, then 3 days later. And then we have 2 more recording it another day later. And then it goes, and these are all mostly in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. And then eventually you're going to get down to Georgetown. That's about like half a month later, a couple weeks later. And you keep on going. And most of these are local. You can see that there's some down here in sort of Alexandria and DC. And then you do have one in Ohio, which is pretty long. And then all the way about a month later, on June 9th, you have Milledgeville, Georgia, talking about this and saying, oh, a month ago, this mummy came into play. But then even more local newspapers are still reporting it up to, what is that, May, June, July, August, like 3 months later. And you can see how sometimes it's taken a long time for the story to spread, or it's essentially a slow news day. And so they're talking about things that happened months before. Because New York City is not that far from Boston, and even Portsmouth, New Hampshire, although it is marked here, it's a repeat story. Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of this is traveling. This is how news is spreading, because they're sending physical newspapers to these new cities whenever they publish a newspaper. This is one of my favorite random stories that I just discovered when doing this research. So, in 1821, another mummified head is donated to the Peel Museum in Philadelphia by a Commodore Charles Stewart. So he had both an ancient Egyptian mummy head and a small animal mummy, which he presented as gifts to the museum. The head proved one of much curiosity, as it was apparently identified at the time as the head of Pompey the Great. For those who don't know who Pompey is, just to reiterate, Pompey was a Roman, congressman? I don't know what the exact term was, but he had fled from Julius Caesar to Egypt. Senator, thank you. I was like, congressman? I can't remember what the thing is. But yes, a senator who had gone against Julius Caesar and fled to Alexandria. And it is one of the main reasons that Julius Caesar goes to Egypt for the first time. And he's mainly looking for Pompey. Now, Pompey is also... Is Pompey his brother or his son-in-law? Am I correct in that Pompey is his daughter's husband? Or was his daughter's husband, because his daughter had died, I think. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong about this, because I don't know anything about Roman history. But they were friends. Like, he betrayed him, but they were friends. And so when he gets to Alexandria and he meets with Cleopatra the Seventh and technically her brother / co-ruler, her little brother, Ptolemy, I can't remember what number he is, but Ptolemy the whatever, I think he's 13th maybe, he found Pompey and he killed him. And he presented Pompey's head to Julius Caesar. And this is one of a very, very pivotal time period. This is sort of like, I don't know what would have happened if Pompey was alive. I weirdly feel like this sort of showed Ptolemy's hand, and his, I don't know, craziness, and like, yeah, so Pompey was married to Julius Caesar's daughter. Kind of looks like a nerd to me. But yeah, like, this is a very important pivotal moment because they present his head to Julius Caesar, and this random head that has now been donated to a museum in Philadelphia is claimed to be the head of Pompey. I will be later posting this on my YouTube page. But it might take me a couple days. If you do want to watch it quicker, as soon as we finish the stream, you will be able to rewatch it on Twitch. It stays up on Twitch for about 2 weeks. And then hopefully by that point, it'll be up on YouTube. All of my past lectures and guest lectures and discussions are all on YouTube. And I have the same username on both Twitch and YouTube. And that is okay. Absolutely. You're all more than welcome. I understand people are all over the world watching. He does kind of look like Paul Dano. So yeah, this random mummified head. Have a great night, Hef. This random mummified head that's been presented to a museum in Philadelphia is claimed to be that of Pompey the Great. So it had been identified as Pompey by the Reverend Thomas Hall, which, if you remember correctly, he was also one of the people who donated a mummy. He had apparently been given the head of this mummified head and this animal mummy, which I think in recording is actually a dog. Just so you know, this is not a picture of the mummified head. That is a statue of Pompey. We don't know. We don't know. I don't have a picture or drawing of what this mummified head looked like. This is just a statue. Yes, apparently a mummified dog, which is very common. And he apparently got these in May of 1819 by an Armenian who had just come from Alexandria. And the story goes that the head had been purchased from a thief who had stolen it from a stone coffin when he was helping to dig a canal in Alexandria. So like they found a stone coffin, he took the head and then sold it. And of course, they also said that the mummified dog came from inside a pyramid, which he knows totally true. The head was apparently really well preserved, had lots of fine linens around it, which led the Reverend to claim that the head belonged to the great Roman general. He technically did use a source by the scholar called Appian, who said that the head of Pompey would be interred in Alexandria but not burned. And so because, hey, some random head was found in Alexandria, it must be Pompey. Before it actually went to the Peel Museum, it was actually on exhibition in New York after it arrived to the US. And to my knowledge, this is the first ancient Egyptian mummy that goes kind of on public display, at least not in a museum, because it went on this display in New York City. And again, Reverend Thomas Hall was the one who gave the baby mummy in the small hand to the Philadelphia Medical College. And apparently everyone sort of made fun of him for this, made fun of him for claiming that this was the head of Pompey, that he was a really respected dude, but he was easily duped. And so there's several articles that talk about the head of Pompey, and they're totally ridiculing the idea. I actually wonder, do I have a writing of that? Let me see. I might be able to read out some anecdotes. This book, while great, has a lot of full newspaper articles that are sort of typed in and stuff, and it's kind of a lot sometimes. Oh, Okay, they don't have any of the writing. So, this is a fun one because it's not exactly where you expect a mummified head to go. You will notice that most of the mummies that we are talking about are being displayed in a very select area. We're going to talk about this because I did not realize that Cincinnati was a major city. We're going to talk about this. But when you look at the cities that we're going to mainly be talking about, it's Philly and Boston. Like, those are the two main cities, and New York City. So most of the one we're seeing on the East Coast. We're not really seeing a lot of cities inland. But I'm an East Coaster. I genuinely did not think Cincinnati was a big city, but hey, I did some research for you so I could figure out that Cincinnati was a big city. It was actually founded in 1788. I had no idea that it was that early. And the city was still small in 1820, but we do know from 1810 to 1830, the population nearly tripled to around 9,600 to around 24,000. So it was probably in that 10,000 range at that time. But yeah, I didn't know. I apologize. Ohio is a flyover state. I apologize, but it is. So the Western Museum of Cincinnati was formally dedicated in June of 1820, though it had originally been acquiring objects about 2 years earlier. And then in 1824, it acquired a large number of natural history collections like coins, Egyptian and Roman antiquities, and the head of an Egyptian mummy. Apologies. So there's also apparently a number of papyri and votive statues that were added to this collection. But this does, at least based on the record of what objects are coming to America, these are some of the first ones that we actually can tell that are ancient Egyptian but not mummies that may have been brought to the United States. I would have to do a much bigger deep dive to really figure out what is the first ancient Egyptian object that has entered America that we know about. But, so it's a little bit hard to tell, but this is definitely some of the earliest objects that have come into America that are not mummies. And then this head in particular, was claimed to have been given to the curator directly by Mr. Belzoni himself. All right, we're gonna take a bit of a break because this guy's gonna take us a long time to talk about. Any questions so far? This is when we really get started. Because this guy is super, super fascinating. So Mr. Belzoni, it's actually a beat, we'll find out, friend at arms. Mr. Belzoni is essentially he was like a former strongman, like circus performer in Europe, and then he was sent over by the British Museum to acquire artifacts. And he is one of the worst people to be doing so because he's really just like ripping artifacts out, doing no archaeology, not even attempting to do archaeology. So a lot of objects are difficult when they're underneath him. You know what we're gonna do? I have been inspired by another streamer to try to stand. We're gonna try to like go back and forth and standing and sitting. I'm gonna attempt to. I think this is probably going to be one of the more easy streams to do it rather than like a gaming stream. But I have a standing desk. So we're going to try to stand for a little bit. My back is starting to hurt, so. All right, let's see how high I have to how high I have to put this. Okay, automatically I got to go higher. Can it go higher? Let's see. God, this is so high. I'm so tall. Oh my. Nope. Nope. It's a little too high. I'm just too tall. That is true. No, the reason it got too high is because my light hit the ceiling. Yeah, let me rotate it up a little bit. I think I can go. Okay, that's probably as high as we're gonna go. I have to figure out a way to like touch the camera like without just physically moving it. I think there's a way that I can do it, but I'm not sure. Okay. Let's see how long, somebody time this. Let's see how long I can stand doing this. I mean, I'll probably be fine, but I'm just curious. I'm also hot. Oh. My fan is going and it's really close to one of my lights, so. Other things we're gonna have to adjust if we wanna do this. Yay! Okay, I'm gonna angle this up just a little bit. Please don't fall. Okay, so let's talk about Paddy Hair Chef, who is the OG of these, maybe not traveling mummies. He does not do as much traveling as some of the mummies that we're going to talk about, but he is like, for the longest time, people have talked about him as he was the first Egyptian mummy to get to America, even though that is not true, as we've now established it. But, like, he is one of the, like, people have always tended to talk about him as one of the first complete mummies that has arrived in the United States. He definitely is the first mummy that gets, like, nationwide recognition. He's, like, people know about this mummy. And he arrives on the 26th of April in 1823 in Boston on the Yankee Bridge Sally Ann, under the command of Captain Robert M. Ides. The funniest part about this is that this mummy was sent to America with essentially a letter telling... This is so funny to say. It was sent to America with a letter saying, hey, this mummy's for you. It was like a gift. Like, it is genuinely has the funniest origin story, I guess. And we will pause for the ad, I promise. I wonder, let me read it. I actually think I can get the letter. It might be a little long, but we'll see. Let's see. Where's the letter? Okay. Okay, no, it's too long. I can't read it. Essentially, that's like a whole entire page. I can't read that long. So, it originally was sent by a Mr. Jacob Van Lennep, who relates how this piece was acquired by the British consul in Alexandria, and apparently this consul acquired the mummy in Thebes because, quote, there were no good ones to be found in Cairo, which is like my favorite line. And he pretty much sends this piece to Boston with the sole purpose of showing it off to the public, immediately essentially sending it to the medical college in Boston. It is not being sent to a museum, and museums are sort of around at this time. It is being sent directly to the medical college in Boston. And it literally was just sent there. Like, I'll read the very, very beginning of the section because it is funny. Gentlemen, there is now on board the ship Sally Ann, lately arriving from Samira, a mummy sent by the care of Captain R.B. Eads to him and myself to be disposed of as we may think proper for certain purposes, as they are of a benevolent nature, and the learned may be gratified in examining the case, hieroglyphics, etc., etc. We request that it may first be placed under your charge at the medical college. Like, it's not a gift. It's just... we think you should have this, so we're just mailing you a mummy from Samira, which I'm pretty sure is Turkey, I think. It's like it's an older word for a city. But yeah. And I especially love, I have procured you a mummy, a capital one, as no good ones opened were to be found in Cairo or this place. I commissioned a person going to Thebes to select me one, and I am glad he succeeded in procuring you the best one that has been seen in a long time. Smyrna Smyrna, which Smyrna. Yeah, I think it's in Turkey, but it's not what it's called now. It's like an older term used for that city. So yeah, they send some dude to go find a nice one in Thebes, and then they were like, we're just gonna send it to the medical college in Boston, which is really funny to think about. Yeah, Izmir, that's what it was. Okay, we're gonna get an ad in a second, so we're gonna stretch. Any questions so far? Bring it around town. Will the ad start, or will it not? Istanbul is Constantinople. Istanbul. Yeah, I know. It's not Palmyra. Okay, there's the ad.
Istanbul was Constantinople, now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople, been a long time gone. Constantinople, now it's Turkish delight on a moonlit night.
I was waiting for it. I know. After I get back on top of things, I will be working on the sound alerts. I really want to improve those. We're just gonna steal how Silver does it. I'm freaking hot. I shouldn't have worn this sweater. I should have changed. Long time gone, Constantinople, but it's kind of like moonlit night. I'm just having fun dancing. Yeah, that's the plan. I just have to move everything over, and the big thing is that I think Silver told me that I have to upload all the sounds, and that's gonna take a while. But I'm thinking about trying to see if I can get rid of stream elements almost entirely. I think the only other thing I gotta check on like my timers. I think I can use that Mix It Up bot. Being very excited. I just gotta like, I'm so fucking behind. I gotten much more ahead because I canceled stream on Thursday. But essentially, I have no videos left, so for TikTok, so I couldn't post a video today because the only day I can film is tomorrow. But then I also have to do my taxes tomorrow. And then I have the lessons that I'm doing this month, which I have to do. Yeah, I'm just behind on everything. Like in what way? Like to post on YouTube? Or, oh, to post as a video? The thing about my TikTok is that they are completely and utterly separate, the fan bases. So anytime I post anything personal about myself, like something about my birthday or like something not Egypt related, or if I post anything about Twitch, it's no views, it's nothing. But yeah, I have been considering, like, I have clips, obviously, that can get edited down to make TikToks, but it's just not this is not the same audience or platform. But yeah, we're almost there. It's only one day that I'm missing. Okay, are we back? We're live. Sorry, I'm eating corn nuts because I need the salt. Okay, so, we have Potty Hair Chef. So when they are describing the mummy, and one of the things that they say is, I'll read out this paragraph. So Captain Eads takes obligingly under his care this case under the denomination of Egyptian gum on account of his men, and we begged to consult you, Mr. Tilden, about presenting it in some suitable manner in my firm's name. It will excite some curiosity to the public, and I hope gratify the learned. We have been so much benefited by the Boston trade, we thought of sending you a mummy, thinking it would be acceptable, as I do not recollect having ever seen one in your museums. There are 3 cases, so we can assume they mean sarcophagi. I think the last one is full of hieroglyphics and must be opened with caution. We did not open it here as we were afraid of spoiling it, which is like one of my other favorite lines from this letter. And essentially, we have a very early example of like preservation of history, though I don't exactly know what they mean by it's full of hieroglyphics, if it's just meaning, oh, the case is covered in hieroglyphs, but it's very interesting. And then the letter also adds to how the medical college should present this mummy, and they also say you should charge 25 cents, which was a kind of standard price for a lot of these sort of traveling shows and traveling exhibitions, is like 25 cents or so, although it's a little high. So there are some that are lower, but 25 cents is reasonable. And then they also clarify that, hey, that money should be paid first to the Boston dispensary and then the hospital with like specific notes to help the poor. Like they're totally dictating how this mummy should be presented and why. And it's like fascinating to me that they're just like, yeah, we're just sending you a random mummy and this is what you have to do. I'm realizing this sweater is very dirty, but I don't know why. So here we go. Here is Potty Hair Chef himself. Yeah, it's not horrible. I feel like I've heard of slightly less. I've heard of ones that are like, oh, you can pay $1 for a year's subscription to this museum. So I think 25 cents is actually a little bit high in comparison to some of the other things. But no, it's not bad in comparison. So this mummy was fully examined by Boston Medical College, specifically by the man here on the right, John Collins Warren, which we talked about. It is the first place that it was first place as, quote, an appropriate ornament of the operating room in the hospital. Dr. Warren then hired an engraver to make drawings of the sarcophagus to prepare the mummy and also make a glass case to hold the mummy, which, as you see, this is one of the engravings of the mummy, and this is the genuine actual case from the 1830s that it is placed in. He does have decent teeth. He's got a little in the front that are kind of bad. Welcome on in. Thank you so much for the follow. Yeah, he's got a good amount of his teeth. His little front tooth looks like sad. They also made bills, or essentially handbills. It's essentially a pamphlet to talk about the mummy and advertise it. This mummy was then placed on public exhibition at Mr. Dodgett's Repository of the Arts on Market Street in Boston in May of 1823. It is estimated that he received an estimated of 500 to 600 visitors in the first 48 hours of display. So somebody can do that calculation to figure out how much money they got. And then by mid-June, it was nearly 3,000 people have seen this mummy. And there is an anecdote from a young gentleman who saw this mummy in 1823. And at the time, the mummy was claimed to be that of a woman and at least 3,000 years old. So it said 500 to 600 visitors in the first 48 hours that it was displayed. And then it was 3,000 by about a month and a half or so. So that's potentially a decent amount of money for 25 cents a person. Yeah, $125 an hour. That's pretty in the first 48 hours. And then we can do the interest rates and all of that, but pretty good. Especially because they were saying, oh, the first amount of money is going to be sent in, and the first amount of money is then going to be like sent to the dispensary, and they've made that very, very quickly in their time. So my other really fascinating thing about Potty Hair Chef is that he is technically the subject of the first American Egyptology paper. So this is written by Dr. Warren, who examined the mummy. It's published also in 1823 in the Boston Journal of Philosophy and the Arts. It is titled "The Description of an Egyptian Mummy Presented to the Massachusetts General Hospital with an Account of the Operation of Embalming in Ancient and Modern Times." God, 4,700 and then 27,000. Crazy. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's not crazy, but it's pretty good money. Absolutely. This is free online if anybody does want to read it. And I don't mention this until much later, but John Collins Warren is very well known in the medical community. He is one of the first people to use anesthetic on surgeries. Like, he's got a lot of actual medical things under his belt besides examining mummies in ancient Egypt, in Boston in the 1800s. But he has a lot of really interesting medical stuff. There's a medical museum in Boston named after him, a couple things named after him for sure. What we are also very lucky for is that Dr. Warren did not fully unwrap our mummy, which has led him into a pretty great state of preservation. Only the head and neck were unwrapped, but everything else was relatively intact, including this beaded piece of cloth that was on top of the mummy. And the main reason for the examination of mummy is not to learn about ancient Egypt, to not learn about about mummification or embalming. It was technically to actually authenticate it. Like, the whole reason of this paper is to say that this is an actual genuine ancient Egyptian mummy, which I think is funny because it's coming from someone who's never seen an ancient Egyptian mummy before, which makes me laugh. But that is the whole purpose of this paper and of these actual medical doctors examining stuff, is so that they can authenticate it as a genuine piece. Because what is so interesting to me is that a lot of these traveling mummies, they needed almost to reassure people that they were real, which is really funny. Like, a lot of the newspaper articles we'll look at are like, this is a genuine Egyptian mummy. Like, a lot of these things are sort of, they're using this science of letting an expert see the mummy to guarantee to the public that this is actually what they're seeing, which I think is interesting. And a lot of this paper is the history of embalming. So it is a little boring, and a lot of that history of embalming is coming from Herodotus and is coming from like contemporary writers, where it's not great. But there is some stuff that talks about actually how the mummy was examined and the things that he is observing. We are also going to talk about later examinations of Padi Hair-Chef because they are super interesting. And it also shows about how a lack of information that was accessible at the time this mummy was traveling around the country. You will notice that most of the mummies that we're going to talk about later don't have an ancient Egyptian name associated with them. They are just they're usually known actually by the person who brought them to America, by their name. And it took surprisingly long to figure out what the name of this mummy was, the name of this ancient Egyptian. So there was no comprehensive study of this mummy until 1960. Over 100 years after this mummy got to America, it finally gets a comprehensive, not just Egyptological research, but also like medical and like getting CT scans and x-rays and all of that. But nobody translated the hieroglyphs until really recently, which I think is so interesting because the MFA in Boston is so close to this hospital. But it has been on display in this operating room since the 1930s, pretty much. 1830s. We'll talk about the timeline for his travels, but he did not travel very far, or for very long. And so that is when, in 1960 is when they discovered that the sarcophagus had really never been examined, and had never been really translated up to that point. And it mainly was because curious nursing students who would take classes in this operating room went to the MFA and asked, what do they know about the mummy? And that was sort of when the MFA realized we don't actually know anything about this mummy. So we do have two coffins for this mummy. We have one that you can see here that is still in the medical college, and there's another one in a different museum, which we'll talk about later. So one of the coffin inscriptions says, quote, spoken by Osiris, he gives all food offerings for Padi Her Shef, deceased, son of Iref A-en Her, his mother Lady Her Ibez Enez, deceased. Greetings to the Osiris of the West, great god in the midst of ... It kind of trails off. And if you're curious what Padi Her Shef means, it means the one who is a gift of the god Her Shef, which is a specific god. Very minor god though. What is very fascinating about this inscription is that it lists both Padi Her Shef and his mother deceased, but it does not list his father as deceased. And we've talked about this before, but the Maha Heru that gets added to a name tells us if somebody is deceased or not. And so what is very fascinating is that he died before his father did. At least when this inscription was made, it appears that his father may have still been alive. And then another one of the sarcophagus states, quote, an offering that the king gave and Osiris, foremost of the Westerners, lord of Abydos, is that he may give food offerings to the stone mason of the necropolis, Padi Her Shef, true of voice, which also means deceased, son of Iref A-en Her Shef. And here you can see we have an actual title for Padi Her Shef, which is kind of rare. These offering formulas do not require a title for the deceased person. That is not a requirement as part of that offering formula, but we have this title. And that is some sort of indication of what he may have done during his life. The title specifically is Herti Netcher, which typically has been translated as stonemason, but it also appears that the term Heret Netcher is a word for necropolis or cemetery, excuse me. So scholars think that he may actually be somebody who works in the necropolis, maybe somebody who's working with stone in the necropolis. So this is actually supported by a 2013 article where they looked at his bones via CT scans and x-rays and said that he actually does not bear the markers for somebody who tunneled stone as a stonemason on like a daily basis. He does not have sort of those markers on your body, which do appear. And so the author actually suspects that he may have been more of a necropolis worker who went out to search for new burial sites and then taking care of cemetery operations rather than actually like digging and doing stone masonry. The other thing that's interesting is that his title has Netcher. Netcher is the word for God. And I think it's really interesting that it's sort of Herti means a couple different things. I couldn't find the exact article. I'm sure it's around, but I only found that in a reference to another article. I would like to read it. So if you want to search and see if you can find that article, I was struggling to find some of the it said 2013, so semi-recently. I was struggling to find some of the actual scientific articles and some of the actual breakdowns of a CT scan. It appears that he got CT scans in 2013 and maybe 2013 is when he had a conservation treatment. I think these photos are from 2013, and so I wasn't able to find the actual article. I was finding news articles, not a published article. And I think these photos again are also from here. You can see that beaded net that's on top of his body. That's actually really, really well preserved. So it does appear that he had x-rays as early as 1931. And it was really, because he's located at a medical college, it appears that a doctor got the x-rays out of pure curiosity. And then there also were some apparently in 1976. I couldn't find any of the images of any of these x-rays. But the x-rays gave us the first clue of some possible causes of death for him. His body does show an injury that looks like a crush injury to his chest, which led some people to believe that he had died in an accidental fall. There was also some evidence of a possible illness from childhood that stunted his bone growth in his skeleton, and something called the Harris lines, which are present in both of his tibia. And the Harris lines, and Mark can correct me, but this is what the article said, Harris lines indicate some stress caused by poor health or possibly by diet, and those did appear in the CT scans and x-rays. And so, woo, perfect, something correct. So scholars may have concluded that like there's a couple options of like, okay, there's some sort of accidental fall possibility. There's also just, he may have been not getting enough nutrients, could have been malnutrition. And they also then kind of jumped that gun, oh, maybe it's during a famine. It's speculation, but there's some indications of malnutrition in some cases. And then those people who say about the malnutrition, they actually then say that the crush injuries were probably post-mortem. We actually see this fairly common because obviously your body is dry, so any little thing is actually going to like crush it. We actually see this quite a lot where sometimes like the wrappings themselves will just like over time restrict and crush like stuff because you're a dry piece of jerky, unfortunately, and you're a little bit more fragile. So the unfortunate thing is that our mummy had a lot of rough time in the 1980s and 1990s, where it appears that the mummy was actually out on loan to other museums. According to some of the articles that I was reading, press photos may have caused the resinous coating on his face to soften, which is not great. And then apparently at one point the whole head fell off and had to be stabilized with a broom handle, which you can see here. But there's a lot of speculation about this broom handle situation. I don't think we unfortunately have a yes or no how this happened. It may have been, like, obviously this is just a very fragile human. Fragile, poor little human. You can see his jaw is really messed up. His teeth, his bottom teeth are actually like really far up. And there is a chance that the broom handle was inserted by medical students who used it, who used the mummy for classroom like shenanigans, and when they took the mummy, the head fell off, and so then they inserted the broom handle to get his head in. But then it also appears that in the article by Dr. Warren, they said that the head was already dislodged. And there's a chance the rod was put there in the 1800s. And so apparently it's very obvious though that it is actually a broom handle because it has, you know how brooms have like a little like striation to like screw the broom on? That's what it apparently looks like. So apparently they're very adamant that it is a broom handle, but unclear. I wonder if that's it. Oh, it's academia. It could be it. Yep, that sounds like it. That looks like it. It's 2014. Shut up. Ackman Mummy Studies Consortium. Yeah, that definitely, it's 2014, but it definitely could be. Thank you, Mark. We'll look through that maybe a little bit later. So yeah, so it's the broom handle is a little vague. We're not 100% sure where it's actually sort of coming from. Cool. Maybe we'll look at it in a little bit. I want to make sure we get through everything tonight. So 2013 again is the first time that we're getting this full comprehensive scan and conservation treatment because the 80s and 90s was not doing it justice. And that's where we get these CT scans, and then we also get like a 3D rendering of his body, and we also get a 3D model of maybe what he looks like. In total, we do believe that Paddy Hair Chef probably lived to around 20 to 30 years old. He probably lived sometime during the 26th dynasty, approximately 663 to 525 BCE. This is during the late period, and the evidence of all the proper names that are mentioned in the text really dates it closer to the late period. I also forgot to mention, again, the advertisement for it in the 1830s said that it was a woman. It's definitely a man. And that obviously you can find that because he wasn't fully unwrapped, so it was kind of jumping the conclusions. And this mummy is still there in, oh wait, no. Oh, sorry. This is what I was gonna show you. I forgot to do it twice. So you can see here the three, so here is one coffin, there's multiple drawings of the different coffins, and then this is sort of the inner coffin, this is the outer coffin, and this is a drawing of the outer coffin. And this is where the mummy is still. So this is an older picture up here. This is called the ether dome of the Massachusetts General Hospital. It is the first operating room that the hospital was built around. I think it's either now used just for lectures and as a museum. So this is an older picture. You can see that the mummy is sitting upright and the sarcophagus is on the other side. And then these two cases have medical equipment. These again are the original 1830s cases, but now he has a new case because it's really bad. It's really, really bad to keep a mummy upright. It's so much better for them to be lying on their back. And so that you can see the new case down here is with them lying on his back. And then the outer coffin is located at the George Walter Vincent Museum in Springfield, Massachusetts. And it's been there for a very, very long time. Essentially, the hospital gifted that at one point to the museum. I think it like loaned it out for a while, and then essentially it was like, yeah, you can keep that on kind of permanent loan. Most of the time, Otto, they left them there. Though there is a very strange phenomenon with a lot of the pharaonic mummies where they're missing. I think they may have gotten just broken off and fallen somewhere. But all right, it's 8:49. I'm going to sit down. It's kind of funny. It's like my back feels like a little bit better, and then my back starts to feel a little bad. I've been having very weird back pain lately. Ooh, it's because of probably all the exercising I've been doing. Hi, text you. Welcome on in. I know the camera's a little high, but that's okay. We are talking about mummies, and them being displayed in museums or being displayed in like back rooms of taverns and stuff. Yeah, I got 30 minutes. All right, that's pretty good. So we'll sit for maybe another 30 to 40 and then try to stand again. We're testing this out. I don't know. My feet are kind of bad, but I'm thinking it might help over time. So the travels of Paddy Hershef. So he did not travel nearly as far as some of the other mummies that we are going to be talking about. Yeah, you're good. We do know that he did get pretty south, though. He did get more south than a lot of the mummies we'll talk about, which is pretty impressive. So we know that he is first publicly displayed in Boston at Dodgett's Repository, and essentially the General Hospital decides that they're going to embark on this like very ambitious journey, and there are objects that absolutely have traveled the United States this far, but this is kind of unprecedented. This is like one of the first full Egyptian mummies, and they are going on a traveling exhibition. This is very unlike the time. I don't really know, Otto. We don't have sort of a lot of evidence, but it's just a lot of them are kind of missing, and so it's unclear where they went because we have not found them. But yeah, we don't really know. It's kind of weird. They're just not really there. They could have been like knocked off in embalming. They could have been knocked off later. Like, it's just unclear, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm gonna chug some alcohol. And some water. So the trustees of the General Hospital decide to essentially hire agents and exhibitors so that the mummy would be able to travel and they wouldn't really have to go with the mummy at any point to go to these other cities. One thing that's just occurring to me now is the reason that this mummy gets so far south is that they actually decided that this mummy is going to travel by water, as they did not trust travel by land, which is still amazing that they get to, what is that? That's not Atlanta. I don't know what city that is. Augusta. It's Augusta, Georgia. But so mostly this mummy is traveling just by boat, which is also unprecedented. I don't think any of our other mummies that we'll talk about later traveled by boat. Most of them are traveling by land, but it makes sense then that you got Boston, you have, what is that? Providence, Rhode Island, you have Albany, you have New York City, you have Philadelphia, you have DC or Baltimore, one of those, be it Baltimore. Then you have, is that Richmond? Yeah, Richmond, which you can get up via the James River. You have Norfolk, then you have Charleston, South Carolina, you have Savannah, Georgia, and Augusta. Maybe that's attached by a river. I'm not 100%. I know it was already on a boat. It was on a boat before, but when traveling around America, it was not on boats. It was by land. But yes, you're right. It had already been on a boat before. Always gotta poke fun in my talking. So one of the first cities it went to be exhibited in is New York City. It was displayed at the Academy of Arts and the Lyceum of Natural History. Then it went to Richmond. And it is actually kind of suspected that this mummy may have been seen by Edgar Allan Poe while in Richmond, because around the same time, he writes a short story called The Ode to the Mummy. And so there is a suspicion that maybe Edgar Allan Poe saw this mummy when on display. It then goes to Charleston, South Carolina, Augusta, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and then back up to Philadelphia, Baltimore, Albany, and then over to Rhode Island. In August of 1824, it's on exhibit in Rhode Island in the courthouse, and then suddenly, another Egyptian mummy is being exhibited in the same town by a Mr. Greenwood. And apparently, this secondary mummy exhibition kind of puts an end to the uniqueness of Potty Hair Chef. And so he's eventually returned to Massachusetts General Hospital. And he sort of goes on display in like the MFA in Boston or another smaller museum in Boston, but he never really leaves Boston permanently ever again. So he didn't travel for very long. He traveled for just a couple months, or maybe a year. So now, let us talk about my mummy, as I lovingly call him. So this is where my mummy comes in, and yes, this is the secondary mummy that kind of pushes Potty Hair Chef out of Rhode Island and then back to Boston. And I am going to be very brief on this because I've done a more detailed story. I've done the full lecture. You can watch that on my YouTube. Thank you. This is, I've talked about this too so much. So there's a full lecture all about just this mummy, and as well as what the concept of oddities and these traveling oddities in taverns. That is on my YouTube. You can watch that. But I'm gonna go over just the basics, I promise. So, this mummy does have a name, but the name was never known in the 1800s. It is possibly known now, but in the 1800s it is only referred to as Captain Larkin Turner's mummy. This is the ship captain that brings this mummy from Trieste, Italy, which was the formal major naval base of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. We don't totally know why he decided to bring this mummy to Trieste. We don't know why this mummy was brought to Trieste. But it does appear that there was a lucrative business of exporting Egyptian mummies to Trieste to at least be sort of a middle ground that people who couldn't get to Egypt could buy Egyptian antiquities. And there's actually an Egyptian museum in Trieste that has some of these objects that really never left the city. And the reason that this is my mummy, and I guarantee this is my mummy, is because it actually arrives in Boston on January 8th, 1824, which, for those of you who know, that is my birthday. Not 1824, but January 8th is my birthday, and so it was fate. It was fate that this mummy became mine. This mummy, no. As you will see, almost all of our mummies date from after the New Kingdom. We have very, very little that come from the New Kingdom. Old Kingdom mummies almost don't exist. There are very, very, very little preserved Old Kingdom mummies. For good reason, because their mummification is not good. It's just not up to the standard that you get in the New Kingdom, which helps preserve the bodies more. So yeah, Old Kingdom mummies are almost... I don't know of any hugely famous Old Kingdom mummies that are still preserved today. But yeah, you'll find out most of the mummies we're going to talk about are like late period, third intermediate period, late period Roman period. So when this mummy got to America, it was also briefly examined by Dr. Warren, again, just to be authenticated as a real mummy, rather than sort of any scientific process or something. So one of the very obvious differences between this mummy and Potty Hair Chef is that there's not really a consistent owner of this mummy, at least by the name that we know today. It's named after this captain who brings it to America. It's not totally clear if the captain owned the mummy or if he was bringing it for somebody else. And it appears that this mummy was sort of just passed along by exhibitors as it traveled the United States, and until we get to Mr. Greenwood, who buys it. But before that point, we don't actually know who's getting the money. Is it going back to Captain Turner? We don't really know. Ironically, the first location for where this mummy was on display is at Dodgett's repository, where Potty Hair Chef had been located first as well. It's even more ironic because Dodgett was the company that was the agent for Potty Hair Chef. And he was still being exhibited in the country around that time. We don't know. So it appears it more than likely was Captain Turner's. Like, he saw it in Italy and bought it, but then he goes off and he goes back on his boat. So he's like not actively there in Boston, like traveling around with this mummy. And so it's not totally clear if when he first brings it to Boston, he sells it to somebody, or if that money is being saved away to later be sent to the captain or sent to the captain's family. It's very weird. It's just a very, very strange process. And so it is very funny that not only is it displayed in Dodgett's repository, but that same company that operates that repository is actively in 1824 when this piece gets in, still making Potty Hair Chef travel around. And they are sort of going behind their back and, they're just going to put another Egyptian mummy in our Boston museum. It then goes a little bit north. It goes to Salem, it goes to Newburyport, it goes to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and then it goes back to Boston. And then you get to 1825. Mr. Ethan Allen Greenwood purchases the mummy for about $350 US, which is pretty big sum. At the time, he owned a small museum called the New England Museum in Boston, where the mummy was on display with two other mummies that you see here, and we will talk about them in a second. It later moves to the Providence Museum in Rhode Island, which was also his museum. Again, like these high quality, high class gentlemen are just like popping up these museums out of nowhere. And when it is at his Providence Museum in Rhode Island is where he encounters Potty Hair Chef, also being displayed in Rhode Island. We then know that it was later displayed in John Scudder's American Museum in New York City, but then it actually disappears from newspapers for about 2 years. It then appears to travel through upstate New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and then eventually comes down to Virginia, Washington, D.C., and possibly Baltimore. My favorite fact another favorite fact about my mummy is that when it came to my city, which is the whole reason I started researching this for the first time, the first day that was on display was also my birthday, was January 8th. It was 5 years to the day that it arrived in America. On the exact same day is when it was displayed here in my city, which I think is a coincidence, I think not. It was meant to be me. It was meant to be mine. And by past 1830, we actually have no idea what happens to this mummy. So everything that I say beyond this point is speculation, based on research. We do know that John Scudder, so this museum here on the side, this is called the American Museum. This is very close to where City Hall is located in New York City today. Give me a second, Baha. It's in my room right now. It's because I love this mummy so much, and we found this really high quality print that was in the records in the museum that I currently work at, and so I asked to keep it, and then I framed it. It sits right outside the door to my office. I just love my mummy so much. I love how you said that, but I was like, in fact, I might have it in my office. So funny. So, what we do know is that there's this guy named John Scudder. He has what we call the American Museum in New York City, which is here on the left. This building is very closely located to where City Hall in New York City is located. I think actually technically this building off to the side is supposed to be City Hall. Somewhere down on Broadway, down in that area is where the museum was located. We know that it had already been displayed at this museum earlier. And then we know in and around 1830, I think, or 1832, he advertises about a brand new Egyptian mummy recently received from Thebes. But nobody else in the newspapers are talking about a new mummy coming in. More than likely, this is John Scudder exaggerating about a new mummy that he gets in his collection and exaggerating that it actually is newly arrived from Thebes. But S.J. Wolf suspects that this might be Turner's mummy and that he is just essentially, again, exaggerating that this is a new mummy coming from Thebes, but it's actually just Turner's mummy. It had previously been there in 1824, and so it wouldn't be unreasonable that John Scudder would have bought it to then display in his museum. If this is true, and if the mummy then never left the American Museum in New York City, then we can automatically assume that it enters the hands of P.T. Barnum, yes, the man who later creates the circus Barnum and Bailey, who purchased the entire American Museum and its contents in 1842. Which then, unfortunately, if the mummy then never left the museum, it was probably lost in the American Museum's fire on July 13th, 1865. The museum fully burns down. It apparently boiled 2 live whales alive, because there apparently were live whales in the museum. And so, while we do not know if that mummy was there, it thus ends the life. We believe that the mummy may have perished in the fire. I have searched through so many collections. I have searched through so many pictures looking for my possible mummy. And I have found nothing, pretty much. So the stereotype plate, which you see here in this pamphlet, is the only image we have of this mummy. It has been referred to as the mortal remains of a lady in high rank. We have no images of what the mummy looked like inside the coffin, but we can tell that there was a mummy in the coffin based on the descriptions, and there are written descriptions, especially here with this pamphlet. We believe that the mummy had an unwrapped head and a right hand, and then some of the documents actually say that there are two coffins. Like Padi Hersheth, there are two coffins, an inner coffin and an outer coffin, and that we can presume possibly what we are looking at is the inner coffin. And so one of my favorite parts about this is this pamphlet that you see here. Hi, Addicted. Welcome on in. I don't know, man. I think we're talking about real mummies, but I guess maybe. So this pamphlet was created when Greenwood purchased the mummy, and he created these pamphlets. It's a couple pages. He created these pamphlets to pass out at the exhibition. So it's an 8-page pamphlet. There's only one surviving copy of this pamphlet. And as you can see, it is in the Robert and Virginia Tunstall Trust for the Department of Special Collections at the University of Virginia Library. I may have told this story to you, but this is one of my favorite stories of my life because of just how ironic it can be. When I was an intern and I was researching this project, I found out about this pamphlet and I wanted to go see it in person because I had not been able to. There was no full copy of it. I just knew that there was a pamphlet in existence. I had not seen pictures. There were no pictures online. And so I wanted to go see it in person. University of Virginia is not too far away from where I am. It's a couple hours drive. And if you didn't know, my parents and my brother went to UVA. And my brother was still actively going to UVA at that time. And I essentially negotiated with my brother because my mother asked me to go and help him move the last couple stuff. I'm not there's another brother in my family, but I did apply and I got rejected even with a double legacy, so wahoo wah. But I applied. They did not want me. I was not smart enough for UVA. So essentially my mom asked me to go help Stephen move because they could not help him. And it was just the last couple of his things. It wasn't everything. And I negotiated with my brother and I said, I will help you move if you let me go to your library for about an hour so that I can go take pictures of this pamphlet and be able to see it in person. So I told everyone at my work that I was going to go see this pamphlet and everyone was like really excited about it. Oh God, no, I would have hated to go to UVA. We're just gonna be very honest. I would have hated. I only applied to see if I could get in. That was it. Nope. No such things as memoirs. At least nothing preserved. No, because my parents would kill me, and also, even worse. At least UVA has an archaeology program. I don't even think Virginia Tech does. I don't know. It might. But archaeology is actually a fairly good program at UVA because you can do excavations with Monticello. They have a pretty good archaeology program there. But no, I wanted to go to New York City. Don't send me into the boonies. No, thank you. I mean, yeah, they went there, so they were. They're still big UVA sports fans. No Anthro major. Yeah, that's what I thought. They're really good for their tech stuff, but my friend went there for like pre-law, but it's not a lot of archaeology down. Well, there is archaeology down there, but not at the university. So I negotiated with my brother and I said, "Hey, can I go and see this?" And he goes, "Fine, you can go see that." And I sent a request to the Special Collections Library and I was like, "I want to request this item. I'm coming on this day, da 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 da." And they were like, "Sure, cool, come on over." As I am driving to UVA with my brother, we are about 30 minutes away. We are not too far away. And he was going to drop me directly off at the library and then pick me up in an hour. I get a call from the library. They can't find it. This was a recent acquisition of theirs, and they can't find it. They could not find where this piece was held. They apologized profusely, and they had a policy about not scanning items for people. But I was so pissed off that I pulled out maybe a tiny bit of Karen in me, and was like, "Can I get a scanned copy of this when you find it? Because I know you have it. It's like in your collections. Like it says it's on their website and stuff." And so I was so annoyed that it did not they could not find it. And then I ended up having to come back to my internship, and everyone was like, what did it look like? And I'm like, I couldn't see it. And I could have sworn it was months later. I feel like it was maybe like 2 months or something. I think it was when I was done with my internship. I can't really remember, but they finally sent it. So yeah, so at that time I was not able to. This is the scan. I have the full scan. They did send it to me and stuff. But they like
unacceptable condition.
I was so pissed.
Unacceptable.
I was so upset. I got the scans. It was fine. They were like, yeah, that's totally fine. They sent me the scans. No, this is when I was an intern. So this is 2018. This is how long I've been working on this project. So yeah, they sent me the scans. I have them now. It's fine. I would have liked to see them in person, but that's okay. So what we have with this pamphlet is a detailed description of the mummy and the sarcophagus. We also have biblical accounts for Egyptian mummification practices, and a poem called Address to the Mummy, which dates back to an exhibition by Belzoni. We can also see this inscription here on the first page, which says, R. Middlebrook, May 1827. What's super interesting is that we actually don't have evidence as to where the mummy was touring in May of 1827. All we know is that this piece was originally purchased from an antique collector in Newburyport, Massachusetts, so puts it in the northeast of the United States. But we actually don't know who R. Middlebrook is. We don't know where the mummy was actually displayed in that month and year, which is really fascinating. So based on the one image that we have of this mummy, it has been roughly dated to around the 22nd dynasty during the Third Intermediate period, mainly because coffins of this period don't have hands or elbows or any sort of indication that they are anything but a little tube of a person. And they do have this typical simple decoration scheme. All of this dark portion is probably all going to be black, and it's going to be very simple in comparison to like where we saw pouty hair chefs and some of the other ones we'll look at. And it is also called a stola coffin because of these two bands, this X at the top. Stola means like braces or bands, and so it's a particular type of style of coffin that were made. They don't put their socks on. Love it or list it, this type of coffin. And then the lack of beard on the chin, and then this vulture headdress that is on the head does give us an inclination that it's probably made for a woman. And we do have a tentative translation, which you can see here. We cannot solely trust that these hieroglyphs are accurate. They're not really great. Like, there definitely could be written worse. I've written out the possibility for the hieroglyphs here at the bottom, but it translates to roughly an offering that the king gave and Re Herakti, the great god, Lord of Heaven, to Atum and Anubis, Lord of the Sacred Land, that they might give provisions of alabaster jars and clothing to the Osiris Jed Khonsu Euf Ankh or Jed Khonsu Eus Ankh. The reason we have two different names is because one of these glyphs that's down here is extremely hard to read, and they look too similar. Essentially, the F and the S, the EUF and the EUS, are a male pronoun and a female pronoun, which tells us again if this is a male or a female, but we can't read it. We can imply that it is most likely a woman based on, again, the no beard and the vulture headdress, but there's still a chance that it might be a man because there's not every male sarcophagus is going to have a beard, and just because the hieroglyphs is really hard to say. So in general, the name means may Khonsu say he/she shall live. So it's mainly focusing on the god Khonsu. All right. Any questions about my mummy? I love my mummy. I also got viciously one of the moon gods. Yes. So Khonsu's the son of Amun and Mut, and so is part of the Theban triad of gods. Thoth is sometimes also associated with the moon. This is actually a very common name. What a great question, PG Mothman. This is a super common name, and this has actually deceived me because I search Jed Khonsu EUF or Jed Khonsu EUS Ankh on Google, and there are other artifacts that have this name. And I think there's a Book of the Dead that is Jed Khonsu EUF Ankh. And it's a very common third intermediate period name, and it has deceived me because every time I typed it in, I kept thinking, oh my god, maybe I actually found my mummy, but I didn't. I believe there's a Book of the Dead that it might be a Jed Khonsu EUF Ankh, and like it makes me think, could that be the same person or could it be a different person? I'm not going to say it's a John Smith of the time. I think it's too specific to be a John Smith of the time, but it is still a name that appears during that time period. These mummies, obviously Potty Hair Chef said it was transported by boat. These mummies are being put on the back of a wagon or something. There is no care to make sure that the mummy is going to be okay, pretty much. So, it is transported like any other thing in that time on rocky roads. No, I'm not going to say everybody it was named that. I'm saying it is a name that appears more than once, which for the names that we have in ancient Egypt is much more common. We don't always have a lot of repeating names. All right. Hi, Prime Operative. Mystery Mummy Saturday. Thank you. All right. We're on to the next two mummies, and we're gonna get an ad, of course. Maybe I'll wait until the ad is over. Any other questions about our mummies? Like, why don't I give... Oh, like, I give it a fake name? I don't want to do that. It's a real person. We don't know where. So these mummies are all coming to America in such an early time period that we don't know exactly where they are coming from. There's one that we're going to talk about that based on the style, we think we know what city it probably was buried in. Yes and no, Prime Operative. I don't use the word stolen. Semi-stolen is probably better than stolen. Because stolen implies legality. And there was no law against this. They were taken, they were acquired, they were purchased legally, and then exported out of Egypt. They were unethically taken. That's kind of my distinction. I know it's a stupid little kind of like nuance of language, but they were not stolen in the sense that it was illegal for them to leave Egypt at this time. It was totally legal. Very, very much legal for them to be leaving Egypt. Unethically taken, yeah. Taken by people who think that they made the laws and so they can just follow the laws and not have to care what anyone else is thinking. Yes. Yeah, so this is all before antiquity laws, and so I really try to focus on that like I'm not going to say stolen, because if I imply that this is actually stolen, that then there is legality that you can use to get the objects back, but there's not. If something is stolen that is against the law, you can then use the law to get something back. You cannot use the law for these objects. These objects have left Egypt so early. The only way they are going back to Egypt is if the quote unquote legal owner gives them back to Egypt. There is nothing, no petition is going to be used to get these objects back because there's no legal, there's nothing to prove that they were illegally taken. They were legally taken. If that makes sense. Again, very much nuanced language, but it's like we kind of have to do it because otherwise people will just like I don't know, people just don't understand it sometimes. All right, we got an ad for a second. Yeah, unfortunately it does. Because lawyers can just... Actually, we're going to talk about lawyers in just a second. Y'all are going to love that part. That part's so funny. Very much so. We'll look at the next ones that we're going to see. It is both a hairstyle and a hair covering as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the what's it called? I'm not putting off AC, I'm putting off new game. Oh, very cool, Wiz. What is snood? I don't know what a snood is. Oh. Yes and no. It's probably just a cloth covering that might have had two sections in the front. Hi, Scott. Welcome on in. We're just finishing up an ad break, and then we're going to keep talking. I haven't really tried hot honey because I am worried that it's going to be very hot. No problem, Scott. But yeah, I've never tried it because I don't know how hot it will be. Very hard to gauge. More seconds. Hello, Scott. Welcome on in. We are talking about traveling mummies in the United States in the early 1800s. we've already gone over a couple, but we're gonna look at the peregrine mummies now. Let me take a quick drink of water. So most of these at the least were opened to check the mummies and to check the authenticity of the mummies at the time, but that does not mean we have any drawings of the inside of the mummies typically. I'm trying so hard to pronounce it. Kumakwa, thank you so much for lurking. Feel free to listen and chill. So these are two other mummies that Mr. Ethan Allen Greenwood did own and displayed at his New England Museum. They entered a very, very similar time at the US than Dr. Turner's mummy, and you can see that all three of these, or sorry, Captain Larkin Turner's mummy, you can see my mummy is here on the left, and then these two mummies are included, all at the New England Museum in Boston. And these two mummies came to the United States, came in through Boston in June of 1824 on the Peregrine, which is a boat that came from Gibraltar, and this is where they get their name from. And these two mummies, as per usual, are claimed to be, quote, fresh from Thebes. That is what they are typically referred to. They are. I have been inside the, not every pyramid, but some are still accessible. There are still like probably 5 or 6 maybe that the public can go into, but not all of them are. This newspaper article about the arrival of these mummies says, at this rate, the flesh of the mummy will be as cheap as that of dogs. The market is already glutted. A few more of these Egyptian carcasses with a mermaid or two, and the stock of our museums will be as cheap as candidates for the presidency. One of my favorite quotes I've ever heard in my life. That already at this point, we literally only have, what do we have? We have 4. They have 4 mummies, and they already are saying that we are glutted with mummies. We are full of mummies, and they're going to be essentially a cheap shot. And as you guys will see, they're still bringing mummies to the United States after these ones. So we have absolutely no info as to who sent these mummies to the US or where they were when they first arrived in Boston. We have no idea. All we know is that Mr. Ethan Allen Greenwood purchased them in March of 1825. He notes that in his diary, he actually began to unroll the mummy to prepare them for exhibition. And he created this broadside, which you can see here on the left, for the exhibition of the 3 mummies together at the New England Museum. As described on the broadside, this gives us actually one of the best descriptions of all of the objects, especially objects that are not actually drawn or depicted. So, broadside is just a name for a poster, essentially. They sort of use it as like it's either a poster, I don't know how big that is specifically, it might just be a pamphlet. I think it's a historical term that's used for like a pamphlet that would be passed out for people. And you gotta remember, paper is pretty expensive and getting something printed is pretty expensive. So this is like investing in your exhibit by printing these broadsides. Not a lot of them get things like this. Like obviously we have the 8-page pamphlet that we have for Captain Turner's mummy, and we have this broadside for all 3 of them, but like not every mummy has something like this because the person who owns that is not always going to invest the money into getting something printed at that time. The most part, Scott, these are not famous mummies. These are mummies that people have done research on, like following them via newspapers. Many of the mummies don't even exist anymore, and we don't know we don't know what happened to them. The one that we talked about first is this one, Paddy Hair Chef. He is still around. He's at the Massachusetts General Hospital as an exhibit because that's where he was delivered in the 1820s. But most of these are not most of these are not famous mummies. Yeah, exactly. How newspapers were single pieces of paper, for sure. Yes, we are specifically only looking at mummies I'm calling them traveling mummies. These are mummies that went on display in the back rooms of taverns, in private homes, in early versions of the museums in the 1800s of the United States. So most of these mummies are not famous at all. We don't even know who they are in a lot of cases as well. Yeah, absolutely. There's also indications, Prime Operative, that all of these different traveling shows, you'd have somebody who is sticking with the object, with the mummy, or with the scientific invention, or any of these sort of things. You actually somebody gets sent ahead to the next city to then put it into newspapers and then to advertise in other ways and figure out where the mummy's going to go next. Yeah, absolutely, Friend at Arms. This whole lecture will be up on my YouTube probably by the end of the week. So here's the fun thing, Prime Operative. Cartouches are only for pharaohs. So I talked about, we'll go back slightly. Ooh, that's not. We talked about this mummy here. We do have a translation of the hieroglyphs on this coffin, but we don't, it's not written as a cartouche. The end of his name is, the name is just here at the very end of this phrase, essentially. I'm sorry, I lost my place on my document. But these mummies, as you can see, the hieroglyphs are horrible and they don't exist now, so we can't translate the hieroglyphs. So we have no idea who these mummies were. No idea. So the Book of the Dead is a real thing. There is no such thing as the Book of the Living. The Book of the Dead is absolutely a real thing. Isn't it cool? I love analyzing history in a completely different way. I love combining sort of like this. I had to learn a lot about what these traveling shows are like and how they are traveling and how people are accessing these objects and what are people interested in the time. So we have like essentially dog and pony shows. We have the Learned Pig. If you've ever heard of the Learned Pig, it's a pig that can do math. And those things are sent in these traveling shows, but then they also have scientific exhibitions, a new microscope, a new sewing machine. And then they also have the human oddities. So they have people that are born without arms, but they are expert artists. And they have people like the bearded lady, and you have sort of these early versions of circus acts that are traveling around. One of my favorites is a man named, oh God, what's his name? Oh, I can't remember his name now. But his persona is called the Living Skeleton, and he was a man from Connecticut who was like 5'8" and like 58 pounds, and he went around displaying himself and telling the story of him being a soldier in the War of 1812, and Tom Thumb also gets qualified into this category as well. And what happened is when he died, they found a 12-foot long tapeworm inside of him. And he tells the story that he probably got his tapeworm in like the War of 1812, and he died in like the 1820s or something, and he had essentially a massive tapeworm in his body. And so there's sort of this whole phenomenon of these people and objects that are traveling around these taverns in the late 1700s into the early 1800s. There's also a live lion and lioness that travel around. There's animals, there's oddity, like there's just so much. And it's especially that Egypt gets sort of thrown in here. It gives a really great basis for later bounds of Egyptomania, and why people are interested is because they have been in America for so long in comparison. They have been there for a very, very long time. Even if they weren't in museums, they were going to your local tavern, and you only had to pay 10 cents to go and see it. So yeah. Whoa. That's actually kind of cool, Scott. We're talking about oddities. That's like very, 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 very on topic in its own way. Oh God, an Oddities Expo. I'd be kind of freaked out to go to an Oddities Expo, but it would be very interesting, I think. So the one thing I love about this broadside is that it goes into extreme detail about all three of these mummies. It's unclear which mummy is which out of these two peregrine mummies, but there's one that is described as the larger one, and I'm gonna presume that is the middle one because it is physically larger than the other one. And then there is also the second one here on the right. Oh yes, we've already talked about P.T. Barnum because potentially he may have owned this mummy on the very, very far left, though we don't 100% know. And he's going to come back into our story, don't you worry. And what is this large mummy here is described as a fully unwrapped mummy of a woman. She was wrapped in 72 thick wrappings. She had an incision on the left side that was large enough for you to put your hand and your arm into, and she had apparently about 8 inches of long hair. So that's a really great description that we did not get from almost any of the other mummies. And then this mummy over here is described as a male who is advanced in life. He was not fully unwrapped, but they at least had removed around 20 bandages from around his head, feet, and hands. And then the broadside also says, the beard is very perfect, but I can't figure out if they're talking about a beard on the sarcophagus or an actual beard on the mummy, which is possible. Also says he was bald, which makes more sense. So Victor Frankenstein is Victor Frankenstein's a fictional character and Barnum is a real person. So, there was a movie though that had that. That's funny. Fizzle Drip, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome on in. We're talking about ancient Egyptian mummies. So these two peregrine mummies are described with only having one coffin each. But we actually find out with this broadside that our mummy, my mummy, the mummy of Captain Larkin Turner, had 2 coffins, which we can confirm with this document, even though we only have the depiction of one. The images of these 2 peregrine mummies are much less accurate than that of the Captain Larkin Turner's mummy. Obviously, with this previous one, no, I did that again. Sorry. Keep losing my spot because I keep clicking the wrong. The mummy that we have here has more accurate hieroglyphs, and over here these are completely inaccurate and there's nothing really that we can do essentially to try to transcribe these. We do have an estimation of when these 2 mummies come from. So this larger coffin probably dates closer to the 21st dynasty during the 3rd intermediate period, and that's mainly because it has this large wesek or broad collar, and it has crossed arms. And then this one is probably dating to the 25th or the 26th dynasty, similar to Padi Hirshef, the first mummy that we talked about. This is mainly because there are no arms or hands, and then there's this very, very rectangular pedestal underneath the feet, and then the general design, which dates to a little bit later. So, into 1827, Greenwood collects certificates and testimonials from doctors of the authenticity of these mummies. They're getting them, again, from Dr. Warren, because Dr. Warren at this point has now become a standard for authenticating mummies. And then he prepares to send them traveling. As you can see, they do not go very far at all. They go to probably the least amount of places than some of the different mummies that we're talking about. Surprisingly, you would think that if Mr. Greenwood owned 3 different mummies, that he would send all 3 out at the same time, but he does not. Turner's mummy goes much further and travels for much longer than these 2 mummies ever do. We know they were on display in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, and then in 1829 they return to his New England museum. But 10 years later, in 1839, his museum and its contents were sold to a Moses Kimball, who had a museum in Lowell, Massachusetts. And then Kimball famously owned, Kimball, you might recognize the name, but it's usually hard. He was actually the person who owned an embalmed mermaid quote-unquote mermaid, that he leased to P.T. Barnum in 1842. It's called the Mermaid of Fiji. Both Moses Kimball and P.T. Barnum actually go in together to purchase Charles Peale's Philadelphia Museum when it goes out of business after his death. I know every time we talk about P.T. Barnum, we're going to drink because it keeps on happening. In 1841, Kimball opens the Boston Museum and Gallery of Fine Arts. And in the catalog, a year later, it does include a male and female mummy. But in 1893, Kimball's family donates parts of the collection to various other museums, so it is unclear where this mummy went. Both these mummies went. They may have gone to the Peabody Museum at Harvard or one of the Smithsonian museums, but it is unclear if they exist still to this day. I would love to do a deep dive and try to see if I can find something similar to these, but I have not had the time to be able to do it. Next mummy. We are going to talk about another mummy that comes into Boston in August of 1824. And again, you can tell how popular these mummies are because several are entering Boston in just 1 year. This was another Larkin mummy, but it was on the ship of Captain Larkin Thorndike Lee. And fun fact, these men, Captain Larkin Turner and Captain Larkin Thorndike Lee, are not related, but they're both named after somebody called Deacon Larkin, who was famous for loaning his horse out to Paul Revere in the American Revolution. So they're both named Larkin after that. Now, Larkin Lee got this mummy from a man named Alexander Grant, who had traveled through Egypt and Nubia. Specifically, he found this mummy, quote, in the catacombs or repositories of the dead, as he was occupied with the company of 30 laborers in ransacking the ruins of Thebes. Love to say that. Love to hear that. This mummy was actually unwrapped publicly in 1824, which we will talk about in a bit when I talk about some other unwrapping parties that happened in the US. But after the unwrapping of this mummy, it is displayed in New York City. He apparently arranged this with a Mr. Bishop. And then, yeah, that is true. Ethan Allen is also a Revolutionary War patriot. It's actually weirdly common to name your child first name, last name as first name, middle name, last name. So Benjamin Franklin blank or George Washington blank, George Washington Carver. It's actually stupid common to name it after founding fathers with that, in that way. I think we're gonna do a section of standing. We're trying to use actually my standing desk that I never use, even though I accidentally almost hit my light on the ceiling and on the fan. Maybe a little higher. Nope, things are falling off. Let's hope everything stays together. After the mummy was publicly unwrapped in 1824, it was displayed in New York City, and this was apparently arranged with a Mr. Bishop. Captain Thorndike Lee dies shortly after on the coast of Africa from, quote, anxiety, which is very funny to think about, but somehow he dies from anxiety. And his heirs try to locate Mr. Bishop and this mummy. They can't find it. So they were able to sort of track where this guy and where these mummies had been going. And they find out that he was in New Jersey and he was in Pennsylvania, and it was on display in a few different cities. And they also, I will say, claimed that this mummy came from a king's tomb in Upper Egypt, which it probably did not. And essentially they figure out that Mr. Bishop absconds, and they're never able to get the mummy back, which is kind of crazy. And so we do believe that it was displayed in the Philadelphia Museum in 1826, though what is unclear is if it was still traveling, like it was in the museum because it was still actively traveling and this was one of the stops, or if it had actually been purchased by the Philadelphia Museum owner, whose name was Jesse Sharples. And no matter what, or like who was owning it, it did also appear to travel more after this time, because it actually appears in Louisville, Kentucky, at the Louisville, Kentucky Museum in 1827, which again is a super, super west in comparison to some of the objects. And then in late 1826, we know Jesse Sharples sold the contents of his Washington and Philadelphia museums, and it is listed on this newspaper article that it includes an Egyptian mummy. We don't have the specifics that it is this Egyptian mummy, but we can sort of presume, because we know that he supposedly had it on display at least a couple years before. But 3 years later, this guy is still trying to sell the contents of his museum. Like, nobody is picking this up. What are you doing, Fitbit? Oh, it just said that I got 9,000 steps, which is obviously a lie because I have not taken a step. I'm moving my hand, but that's okay. I did get a lot of steps today. So the funny thing is that, like, it took him 3 years to try and sell the contents of his museum, and in that like article, it actually does confirm that this was Captain Lee's mummy. But unfortunately, the trail goes cold, and we have absolutely no idea who purchased it, or even if anybody purchased it, or if it just gets thrown away. We have no idea. We have no indication about who purchased this mummy or where the mummy goes to. And although the picture of this mummy is decent, the hieroglyphs are I can't say that word, illegible. This mummy, the Captain Larkin Thorndike Lee. This mummy is MIA. And even though, so we can't read the hieroglyphs unfortunately on it, but we can date this mummy to the late 21st or early 22nd dynasties. Like Turner's mummy, we call this a stole mummy because of the X, the bands that are across the chest. You're good, Otto. And because of the presence of the crossed arms, and like the hands, and then this sort of lappet style wig, so instead of it just being a long thing, they have sort of this this like sort of band around the side, that is indicative of the time period of the 21st to early 22nd. So this is technically one of the older ones. We haven't had a 21st dynasty one, but it's still not that old in comparison. So these two pieces right here at the end of the wig are actually supposed to be breasts. So it does tell us that this is more likely the mummy of a woman. And then this style of mummy is very common coming out of Thebes, or Luxor. So we do have sort of an inkling that that is more than likely coming out of that city during that time period. All right, everyone ready for the craziest story that you're going to hear tonight? It's gonna be the blockhead mummy. This one's a little bit crazy, but it's pretty funny. I do fear that I'm not gonna actually talk about P.T. Barnum anymore, so y'all can take shots whenever you want. He's mostly talked about at the beginning of this lecture, but he is very much involved because he buys up all of these museums when they're sort of struggling to acquire lots of objects and stuff. So, this is the blockhead mummy, and I'm using quotation marks because obviously we don't have a name for it, but it looks like a blockhead. So, a George Barclay of New York obtained 2 more mummies through an agency in Trieste, Italy in 1826. Supposedly the person who he got them from was in Egypt, and he saw them removed from the place of the original deposit. Again, giving us that evidence that, like, there's the direct looting of sites. Like, the objects are physically being dug up and then put on a boat to Trieste to be sold. Like, this is that physical, like, actual continuation of this looting that is being lucrative into the antiquities world, the antiquities commercialism, essentially. And so Barclay placed his mummies on exhibition in this man, Peale's Museum and Gallery of Fine Arts in New York City. This is not Charles Peale that we talked about. This is not Rembrandt Peale. This is Reuben Peale. He is also the son of Charles again. And Reuben starts this museum in New York City versus his brother's, which is in Baltimore, and his father's, which was in Philadelphia. So he was this proprietor of the museum, and he purchased these very shortly after. So Barclay sort of, I guess he technically, leased them out to the museum, and then eventually Peale buys them for himself. So one of these two mummies is called the Blockhead Mummy because we have this image. The other mummy is completely elusive. We have barely any description of it. And it does appear that both of these mummies were unwrapped publicly, and I'm going to cover that in a bit as well. The Blockhead Mummy is sold in 1827 by Peale to a trio of gentlemen in upstate New York. Their names are Frederick Boughton, Ira Curtis, and Ebenezer Holt. They exhibited this mummy starting first in Ithaca, New York. It was then exhibited in various cities in New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts before making it all the way back down to New York again. And its last mention of being exhibited is in 1828 in Congress Springs, New York. Very fun fact about Congress Springs. There is a medicinal water called Congress water that comes from Congress Springs, New York. And it essentially is like Fiji water. Like, it is advertised as a medicinal product because it is the waters. It's literally just clean ass water, and it cracks me up every time. But it actually comes from Congress Springs, New York, and it's called Congress water. We talk about it at our apothecary museum, so it made me laugh that this is happening in Congress Springs. So again, so the mummies are typically, in this case, they are more than likely being unwrapped to verify that they are an ancient Egyptian mummy, and then they are either partially rewrapped or they're kept fully unwrapped, and then they are sent out on display. So the unwrapping is actually part of an authentication process at this time period, even though it's not like technically necessary. But again, they're looking at essentially a little burrito of a person, and they want to check that it's not a fake mummy. But again, the person who is mainly verifying this, Dr. John Collins Warren, is in no way an Egyptologist. He is a medical doctor. He did write the first Egyptological article published in America, but he had no qualifications to say whether or not this Egyptian mummy is authentic or not. Like, he didn't have that ability, so it's kind of funny. So, again, the last time that we know it's exhibited is in 1828, but it does get mentioned in two law journals, which you can see here, although these are not the exact ones for the time, but this is an example. It gets listed and talked about in two law journals in October 1829, so about a year later. These texts describe the unfortunate end of this mummy, or at least what we think might have happened to this mummy. So, we know that based on just these two law articles, that in 1828, the mummy was being exhibited at a public house, or like a tavern essentially, in Rensselaerville, New York. I can't say that word, it's got a lot of letters. Yes, even the sarcophagus. So we don't know what happens, but this is what we do know. Apparently, 8 young men, some of which were medical students, decided to dissect the mummy to prove that it was genuine, even though technically it says in other articles that it was already unwrapped. They broke into the public house around midnight, subdued an attendant, and stole the mummy. This mummy entirely disappears and nothing was ever uncovered about what happened to this mummy. What is fascinating is that we have no record of any sort of police presence or the people being arrested or anything else. All we have is this, technically I think it would be considered a civil case, not a legal case against these men. So the three owners of this mummy at the time, Curtis, Boughton, and then a man named Thorne, who had replaced ownership from Holt, brought a suit against the young men to recover not like the mummy itself, but to recover the money that they would have been able to earn if they could have continued to exhibit the mummy in the future. Which is fascinating to me, because I don't care about the law a lot. Like, the law has its own thing, but like, I think that is fascinating to me that they are trying to recoup funds that they technically had never earned. Like, they're trying to recoup future funds that they could have gotten, which I think is fascinating. And essentially, this case dwindled down to whether or not the mummy is considered property, and if it is considered property, who actually owned it. And you guys are going to love the arguments on both sides, because this is hysterical. So the defense argued that the only person who could properly claim the mummy was the last lineal descendant, and that a human body could not be considered property. So there's two different arguments. That it could not be considered property, and that the owner is the last descendant of this human, which is wild. I guess it is, but it sounds crazy to me that in that early time you would be able to sort of predict, like, I don't know how you then predict how much money you could have gotten, if that makes sense. I think that's the part that confuses me, that it's like, how can you predict how long it could go? So that's the argument. The argument that the defense had was that human bodies cannot considered property, which is, I mean, it's a fine argument, but that the owner, if it was property, is the last descendant of this person. The prosecution countered that the body was property, as a physician's anatomical specimens are property. So they're saying that this is not a human body, but this is an anatomical specimen because it was examined and because we are learning from it, essentially. And then the defense came back and said, well, if that is true, then they would have to prove that the mummy's direct descendants sold the body to become an anatomical specimen. That's the best part about this auto. It has nothing to do. This is not like a criminal case. This has nothing to do. This is, they apparently, I don't know if it's that they couldn't prove that the, like, they don't talk about it, but I feel like the thing is they have to, I think this is so funny. I think this is like there are some actual true crime cases. I think this is like actual true crime cases where they don't have a body, so they can't criminally charge somebody with their murder, but they can civilly charge them for who knows what. And so I think it's hysterical that this has like genuinely nothing to do with charging the 8 men that they destroyed property. It's all about like civilly, which I think is fascinating. So again, the defense said that if this piece is considered an anatomical specimen, that they'd have to then prove that the mummy's direct descendants sold the body to become that specimen. The prosecution also pointed out that the Pasha of Egypt, which was the then ruler of Egypt underneath the Ottoman Empire, actually had legally become the administrator of all catacombs in Egypt, so that he actually was allowed to legally sell the mummies. And so those are the arguments. The jury actually rules in favor of the 3 men who own the mummy, in the amount of $1,200 plus the legal cost of the suit. So these 8 gentlemen had to pay a little bit over $1,200 back to the men. But we have no idea what happened to the blockhead mummy. It just completely and utterly disappears. We have no idea what happened to it. So remember that I said that the blockhead mummy was found was brought into America with another mummy. The other mummy seemingly stays in the Peel Museum, and the only description that I can find of it was that it was a double coffin, which means not like this double coffin that I'm showing you here, but it was 2 layers of a coffin, and that it was still supposedly there in 1832. Oh, never mind, I lied. It appears that it may have been purchased by P.T. Barnum, who bought the museum and its contents in 1842. Do a shot for P.T. Barnum. Again, P.T. Barnum buys up all of these museums, and especially one in New York City he bought, along with 1842 is almost the same year that he buys Scudder's Museum as well. So P.T. Barnum buys another museum and probably obtained that one. And then we essentially also then assume that, no, it's every time we mention him. So if that piece then still kept in Barnum's collection, we can also assume that it went up in the fire in 1856. We do have one weird addition to our blockhead mummy story. In 1835, the image of the blockhead mummy, which you see here, was used in an ad at the Peel Museum. But it had been destroyed, right? By Prime Operative. It had been destroyed, correct? We are assuming essentially that they probably just took an old picture of this mummy and put it into that ad without realizing that that mummy had been destroyed. Otherwise, it's a very weird situation why it suddenly reappears. And the final thing is, based on the image of the mummy, we actually date this very late. This is a Roman period mummy. And this has been compared to this coffin, which is the double coffin for twins at the National Museum of Scotland. And again, it gives that square shape head. That becomes very common in the Roman period. So that is why we kind of jumped to that conclusion that it might be a Roman period coffin. All right, I'm gonna sit down. My feet hurt. And yeah, all of my stuff has fallen. Make sure that it doesn't fall some more when I lower this down. Go.
Core computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
I'm gonna do some cord rearranging. Everything's a little tight at the moment. All right, so this is technically the end of these traveling mummies. We do have some other examples of ancient Egyptian mummies being displayed in the United States at this time period, but I'm not gonna have time to talk about all of them, and by the mid-1800s they are no longer traveling. That is kind of the key takeaway, is that I'm only focusing on these ones that traveled all around. And mostly this is because more permanent museums are being established, and the need for them to travel is becoming less and less. like P.T. Barnum's All-American Museum, which you see here on the left, you can see there is a mummy standing here. We suspect this could be Larkin Turner's mummy, but we're not sure. This one I believe is the British Museum, I think, and this might be UPenn. I can't remember now which one it is, but I think the middle one is the British Museum, and I think this is maybe UPenn. Maybe, I can't remember. But we have sort of these more permanent museums that are coming up that people then can go see. They don't have to see these objects in traveling shows. And the museums obviously have more things. They're not just one object in this traveling show. They are full live animals, oddities, natural history, historical or archaeological items. This is what we would call the Cabinet of Curiosities era of museums. And so they don't need to travel these long distances anymore. There was one group that I was going to cover that are called the Mormon mummies. But because they didn't really travel as much, I've decided that, and we also don't have any drawings or pictures of them at all, I've decided to probably save those mummies and talk about them in a future lecture where I talk about the misuse of Egyptomania in America, which is heavily going to focus on the Mormons. And so I think I'm going to save talking about the Mormon mummies later, because they did not technically travel the United States. The last thing I want to talk about is the non-scientific unwrapping of mummies that occurred in America. We do have evidence that many of these mummies were unwrapped, like scientifically by, like, obviously Dr. Warren, who you see here on the right, but many of these are not public. So we're specifically talking about public mummy unwrapping parties. So Larkin Lee's mummy was the first public unwrapping of an ancient Egyptian mummy in the United States, and it was on the 14th of December, 1824. And it was our Larkin Thorndike Lee's mummy that was unwrapped. This happened in New York City's Castle Garden before a small audience. An article describes 26 layers of linen were matted together, and it appears that they may have taken a knife to our poor mummy and just cut a straight line down to the feet, unfortunately. And inside they found a perfectly preserved female mummy. They did also find some sort of glutinous substance within the body, and when they burned it, it had an agreeable odor, as they said. And while I will say this is claimed to be a public unwrapping, I would assume that it was only for some of the medical community, and it does not appear that they actually sold tickets to people. Yes, an agreeable odor. There was another mummy unwrapping held at Reuben Peale's New York Museum in 1826. This was the Blockhead mummy, and the other mummy that was sent was at the museum. And these were apparently unwrapped in front of both ladies and gentlemen. One of the mummies was described as 5'2" and enveloped in 68 layers of linen. The body was in good preservation, though the head may have been unwrapped sometime before the public unwrapping. And it was apparently found with very curly hair. More than likely, this is the description of the other Peale mummy and not the Blockhead mummy, which they apparently did not really describe. Yes, perfumed oils were absolutely something. It seems that after the body was dried, they did sometimes they did anointing of some sort, and so definitely some sort of perfumed oils and such. Hello, Vixie, welcome on in. We're talking about some of the public American unwrapping parties specifically, because they do involve some of the traveling mummies that we've talked about. So there were several other public or semi-public unwrapping parties in the 1820s and 1830s. One is conducted by our Mr. Dr. Warren over here, who discovered that the mummy that he unwrapped was a 25 to 30-year-old woman who had very well preserved teeth. Dr. Scudder, who's not a real doctor, but he had a museum in New York City, he also unwrapped a mummy in 1832 at the museum. The women and children were not allowed to attend, so it's not as public as some of the other ones were. Now, the big American unwrapping party that makes the news most is going to be the one conducted by George Glidden. This might sound very familiar to anybody who came to my Oops, All Victorians lecture last year, because we talk about this extensively, because this is a hysterical story. Hysterical. So George was a British-born son of a US consul in Egypt. He had tried to acquire several mummies before the 1850s, but was unsuccessful due to different reasons, but mostly shipping them to America. But in 1850, he did acquire 2 mummies and was advertising that there was going to be a public unwrapping in Boston. More often than not, these mummies were unwrapped, were usually female, very oddly, and so it's not uncommon to spin them as a priestess or a princess, or sometimes even more specifically, a princess who saved Moses from the Nile. It's like a very common thing that you can do just to spin it to make it more interesting for people to attend your mummy unwrapping. So Glidden did exactly that and advertised the mummy as a female princess or priestess, and then later changed it to a female princess. Glidden conducted the unwrapping during 3 days of lectures where he slowly but surely unwraps this mummy. And on the 3rd and final day, when the mummy was finally unwrapped, it was proven to not be a female at all, but, and I quote, exhibiting in its fossil state the erect, unequivocal mark of its sex. Which is also an amazing quote from that time. Glidden was obviously mortified, and then tried to explain the error as a result of the mistake of the undertakers, but the newspapers genuinely ripped him to shreds. And so much so that somebody wrote a poem about this event. And I will read it to you because it's really funny. Glidden had an explanation, nearly ready for narration. Gentlemen and ladies, said he, this had surely been a lady. But the blundering undertakers or the blundering coffin makers in the Theban shops of mummies proved themselves a set of dummies and misplaced the lady's body by this base-born male Tom Noddy. Great applause the statesman greeted from the folks around him seated. 'Twas a genuine Boston notion, thus to settle the commotion. All abused the mummy bakers, stupid Theban undertakers, for their blundering egregious and their treatments sacrilegious. Of the holy priestess ashes, and for sending them such trash as this male mummy with the label of a lady on the table. Yup. So yeah. It's like one of the best quotes you've probably ever seen. It's such a great poem. So Glidden really tried to dispose of all this turmoil by explaining the error and that it was mainly because he could not decipher the hieroglyphs, which at this point are starting to get like more accessibly because they were making fun of him. They were making fun of him that he made this super huge, like, this mistake. But I think he was obviously, I suspect that somebody made this because he was a cocky son of a bitch, and it was funny to see him suffer for a second. So he really tried to, like, dissuade from people, and he was saying, I mistranslated it, and, like, he, like, kind of flees to Philadelphia. Like, he literally can't even be there. Like, people in his social circle are just, like, making fun of him, and so he sort of flees to Philadelphia, where what else can this man do? He advertises another mummy unwrapping, and then he unwrapped 2 mummies in Philadelphia. Another was found to be a woman, as advertised, and another was a mummy of a young child. He later takes his show to New Orleans, where he unwrapped his final mummy, which he presented to the medical college that later becomes Tulane University, which you can see here. What is very sad to say is that this mummy, when it was en route in New Orleans, and was given to the university and was lost for many years because it had been stored underneath the bleachers in the Tulane football stadium until they were rescued in the mid-1970s, if you could believe it. It has now recently been rediscovered. It has been recently re-examined. It's still in really good condition. But yes, very, very recently in comparison, it was discovered underneath these bleachers in the stadium. I think it was when they were demolishing the stadium they discovered them. It's a very fascinating story if you want to learn a little bit more. They're called the Tulane Mummies. So Glidden eventually quits the lecture circus of like giving these lectures and these unwrappings, and he was appointed the deputy agent of the Honduras Interoceanic Railway in Honduras, and then he dies from malignant fever in Panama in 1857. So good riddance. He's just got such a sad life, and it's just kind of funny. Bleacher is like stand. It's like the seats for the football stadium. A bleacher is just a type of. It's just a series of benches that get taller as you go up. Oh, that's interesting. Murdoch Mysteries. I've never heard that. Thank you. It definitely was supposed to be Lecture Circuit, but it definitely wrote as Lecture Circus. So this is actually the last mummy that we're going to talk about. And it has absolutely nothing to do with any of the mummies that we have talked about previously. But this was too fascinating to not include. Because it does technically travel. So, as we move into the late 1800s and the early 1900s, mummies are absolutely still entering America through both the art market and the archaeological excavation market. But they really are not traveling anymore unless the museum is sending in a traveling exhibition. Not P.T. Barnum, but you will be interested where this story goes, because we are talking about circuses, but we're not talking about P.T. Barnum anymore. So this one travels around the United States at a later date, and as you can see, these are actual photos, these are not drawings, so we still have this coffin in existence. This is the coffin. Fine, I'll do it. I mean, I gotta finish this before we end. Okay. I learned about this coffin when it was being sold on a Christie's auction in 2024, so 2 years ago. And yes, this is just technically a coffin and not a mummy, but we'll get to that. This is a late period coffin. It dates to around 664 to 525 BCE, around the 26th dynasty. And there is a very, very short single line of hieroglyphs here in the center that says the recitation by Ka Dit Iwen, justified, invocation offerings, and then it kind of trails off, God's servant, prophet. So we have the name of the person that would have been buried here. It's Ka Dit Iwen. And this piece was on sale at the Christie's auction in 2024. And you can see its history of provenance here on this page. It was being sold out of a private German collection. But when we look at the provenance, you can see that it goes on. You can kind of, this is the most recent, and then it goes to the oldest history of provenance. So we have a private collector in Germany acquired from above, thence by descent to the current owner. It was purchased during a Christie's auction in 2013, which is the estate of Billy Jameson. Does anybody know who Billy Jameson is? I feel like somebody in this chat might know who Billy Jameson is. But I wouldn't be surprised if somebody knows who Billy Jamieson is. And I should have put a picture of him up here. I am gonna snooze the chat, or snooze the ad in a second. So Billy Jamieson was a Canadian antiquities dealer and a reality TV star who was the star of History Channel's Treasure Trader, which I have never heard of this show. But it was fairly recent in the 90s. It was a History Channel show called Treasure Trader. And he dies in 2011, which is when the estate gives this up. Eventually 2013 is when the actual auction is. Yeah, very credible for the antiquities dealer and the History Channel show. And so even though he's a reality star, the other thing that he very famously did was he bought the Niagara Falls Museum in 1999 when it went defunct. Does anybody remember what ancient Egyptian antiquity was at the Niagara Falls Museum? Which I've talked about this sometime, but it's I can't remember. We talked about this in our discussion of DB320, if you remember. The Niagara Falls Museum supposedly had the mummy of a very famous pharaoh. One of the only mummies of a pharaoh that has ever left Egypt. Not King Tut, no. Supposedly, it is not 100% understood if this is correctly him, but it was the mummy of Ramses I, the founder of the New Kingdom. So this mummy, like, it is unclear how it got to America and how it eventually gets to the Niagara Falls Museum, but nobody knew that this was Ramses I, and we don't 100% know if it's him, but it is highly suspected that it is him. So this guy, Billy Jamieson, was one of the first people to suggest that so he gets this mummy, and essentially he doesn't really know that this is like a famous mummy, but he was the person who eventually sells the entire Egyptian antiquities collection, because this museum in Niagara Falls had tons and tons of stuff. But he sells the Egyptian antiquities collection to the Carlos Museum and Emory University, who eventually then worked out that one of these mummies might be the mummy of Ramses I. So this is like the really big thing. Big part of this. What are you talking about, Otto? Sorry, I missed that. I don't know what rumors you're talking about, Addicted, but I've never heard rumors of Cleopatra's mummy leaving Egypt. That's just, I don't know. I've never heard of stuff like that. So this guy, like, he's integrated very much randomly into the Egyptian antiquities world. I was gonna say which Cleopatra is also a great question. So he bought this particular mummy in 2009 from a person named Lynn Bell, and she got it in 1994. And as you can see, she got it after Larry Mooney failed to complete his transaction with Count Popo de Bath and Adonna Houston. And so we then go back even further, and you see that the coffin was originally owned by James Sam Houston and his daughter Adonna M. Houston. So we do have this mummy of Ramses I, and it has been sent back to Egypt on the belief that it is Ramses I. It is not fully confirmed, but it was repatriated back to Egypt on the belief that it is Ramses I. I don't know where you heard that, Addicted, but that's probably not true, because she also was married twice. Mark Antony was her current husband when she died, and he didn't get buried anywhere either. I don't even know if we have any idea where Mark Antony gets buried, but he dies in Alexandria with her. So that would have been her former husband. But so when we go back further, you may or may not recognize the J. Sam Houston. I have no idea. Genuinely no. It's definitely one of the Ramses, but I'm pretty sure it's Ramses the First. Ramses the First mummy. Niagara Falls. Yep, mummy of Ramses I, founder of Egypt's 19th dynasty, has a remarkable long journey to North America after being potentially looted from DB 320 in the late 19th century and then identified by Emory University researchers. Currently housed in the Luxor Museum. I've seen it in person. Let's use that again. So, the original owner of this coffin was named J. Sam Houston. So J. Sam Houston is not the Sam Houston who was the former president of Texas, which is an actual thing. This is a different Sam Houston who was related and involved with the Professor Gentry's famous Dog and Pony Show, which, yes, is a real circus event and is where that phrase gets its name from. And he was not hugely involved in this show in particular, but he does create his own traveling circus show, sometimes described as a traveling museum of Cleopatra. And he is essentially creating this traveling museum that is going through both the US and Mexico in the early 20th century. And his daughter Adana helped with this business from 1926 until his death in 1957. It is unclear where he got this coffin. It is unclear if there was a mummy ever inside the coffin. We have literally absolutely no idea. But to all of the circus performers, he was lovingly called George. We actually have some really great letters and articles about how this mummy and this coffin was talked about by Adana. So what it appears to be happens is he dies in 1957, and in the 1970s Adana sells it to a man named Larry Mooney. And the sale, though, was brokered by a person named Count Popo de Bath, who was a clown that worked very closely with Adana on their show. And so Count Popo de Bath tries to sell this to Larry Mooney, and he possibly owns it and has it with him, but apparently it was then he could not complete payment. For whatever the payment was, he could not complete it. And so it was then sold to Lynn Bell. It literally takes 20 years because she does not receive the mummy until 1994, which is crazy. And Adana writes in a letter to Lynn saying, quote, "I'm glad, happy, delighted, and overwhelmed with the fact that you rescued Mummy Houston George. Its memories and laughs to which you added a 1994 version of his last, I hope, ride. I still think it would have been great if a highway cop had asked what was in the van and you telling him you had a mummy, etc. I want to hear the whole enchilada sometime." And then there's another quote from, "I've had to fight Sambo for Mummy George. He thought he was too cumbersome. One time on the train living car, we had 2 workers who would limp into the car and come out dancing. I followed and found they had their stash, needles and all, hidden in George. So he ran dope. I once said I would put my ashes in Mummy Houston and have a real tomb, Louisiana style. But I like George too much to put him in the ground after all this on the other side of the lawn. No foolin', the idea, you must admit, is a great one." So in particular for this actual like auction, it was estimated to go from $30,000 to $50,000, and it was sold for $30,240. So even though this is technically not a mummy, and we don't even know what exact locations that it traveled to, I believe this is technically the last ancient Egyptian mummy to actively travel around the United States that was not in a traveling museum exhibition. So that is why I wanted to include little George here at the end of the lecture. In conclusion, I'm going to snooze this ad so that we have enough time. In conclusion, I honestly thought this lecture would actually be longer. I had a lot of other things that I decided to sort of focus in really on that traveling aspect. I didn't want to kind of focus on the ones that go to museums. Thank you. I really hope you guys enjoyed the lecture. If you want to get into more details, you can definitely watch my lecture on YouTube that talks about my specific mummy that I researched. And you can get Mummies in 19th Century America for S.J. Wolf's book about this topic. The book is a little denser than I remembered because a lot of times she puts the full newspaper article like typed up in the book, but there is a lot of really interesting stuff that I did not talk about in this book. I'll read out some of the chapters because it does have some really cool stuff. So we have Potty Hair Chef and the beginnings of mummy mania in 19th century America. That's most of the stuff that we covered. Egyptian mummies in early 19th century America. Then we have exhibiting Egyptian mummies in 19th century America. Egyptian mummies in the Mormon world. There's a whole chapter on that. Interest in Egyptian mummies in 19th century America, that is sort of the unrolling and the scientific study of them. And then we have commercial exploitation of mummies in Victorian America. This actually I didn't realize it, but I covered a lot of the stuff in here in my Oops All Victorians, like mummy paper, a lot of those things I actually covered. And then the last thing is Egyptian mummies in the American public. It's a little dense. It's not too bad, but it's pretty good. We don't got no chocolate mummies. No chocolate mummies. But for something that is not by an Egyptologist, although Bob Breyer does do the foreword for this book, which is really cool, for somebody who does not actually have any sort of background in Egyptology, it's very well researched, for sure.